Hey there, everybody. Today I want to talk about income and wealth inequality and whether there is a need to create an, a system of economic checks and balances to complement the system of political checks and balances that we've created in this country to prevent power hungry individuals from agglomerating effective control of large swaths of society and doing horrible things with it. So, it is a cherished belief in the United States that you have to have checks and balances so that you don't, so that you limit the risk of the political system becoming falling under the control of one dictator. And this is something that people typically agree about across the political spectrum. However, the need for a system of economic checks and balances does not share the same degree of support. It is, at this time, still in the United States, a fringe view. And there are structural difficulties with disseminating the knowledge that this might be something we really need. Specifically, I'm referring to the fact that our media organs all fall under oligarchic control. You have the Washington Post, which is controlled by Jeff Bezos, the Wall Street Journal, which is controlled by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch also owns Fox News, or a majority stake in it. You have Sinclair, which is a massive conglomerate which owns a huge number of local broadcasting agencies. And you go down the line and you see that the same thing is effectively true for social media. Any media system that has a large audience falls under the control of these super wealthy billionaire oligarchic individuals. Okay, well, in a functioning democracy, you need information in order to cast a vote intelligently. And if all information is being filtered through an information system that is naturally going to favor the perspectives and biases of super wealthy oligarchs in control of the media system, then it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get the idea out there that a system of political checks and balances may not be enough. Okay, but why might it be? Why mightn't it be the case? Why might we need a system of checks and balances on private wealth? I want to talk about that first for a little while. And as I'm talking, I sincerely hope I can reach people who may not be inclined to agree with me. I want to reach people from a diverse range on the political spectrum. I hope I can also specifically reach libertarians who've become increasingly powerful in the United States and convince you that in order that we may have liberty, pursuit of happiness, and a just political system, we are going to have to do the difficult work of thinking about inequality, economic inequality specifically. Now, why might this be the case? So, first, let me break down what the two main forms of wealth are in the modern era, here and now in the United States. Okay, they are primarily stocks and real estate. Okay, about half of the wealth held in the United States takes the form of real estate, housing. Okay, and if you had just go to the furthest extreme first, if you had one person in control of all of the housing in a country, everybody would be their fief, would be their servant. The rent would reach an extractive uh, level that requires everybody working to gain access to that housing. They would have to pay and fork over a larger and larger proportion of their income just to have a roof over their head. And so that is a recipe for serfdom. That is a recipe for mass functional enslavement of the masses. Okay, and so the way this works is it's on a spectrum. The concentration, the level of concentration of ownership in this form of wealth, in real estate wealth, is it corresponds directly to a degree of serfdom. The more concentrated the ownership of houses become, let's say you have, instead of one individual, you have 1% of individuals who own 50% of all housing stock. That would tend to drive up the prices in such a way that people would be sharecroppers, or it would be like a sharecropping system, I should say. People would go and work all day just to be able to pay their masters and have a roof over their heads, just to meet the basic need for housing. So the more concentrated the ownership, right, the more like fiefs and serfs we all are. That's housing. Now stocks. So stocks are little pieces of companies, little ownership shares of companies, and the evolution of the modern financial and economic system is intimately intertwined with the invention of stocks. Uh, this financial technology emerged sort of between Netherlands and England sometime around the 1600s. Debatably, you could say part of the idea of how this would work came out of Italy as well. But effectively, corporations now are these huge companies that are publicly owned. They're called publicly owned, meaning that let's say Walmart, right? There's millions of shares of Walmart to be owned, and the ownership is held by a bunch of different people. Okay. The majority of human activity is coordinated today by these corporations. Small businesses are actually a relatively smaller portion of all economic activity on Earth. And economic activity is human activity. The things that humans are doing, they are doing typically in pursuit of a profit motive. And so hyper concentrated ownership of stocks effectively means that you have a very small number of people who are in effective command of the whole economy. Okay, and so that is at odds with the ideals that I think are widely held of having a democratic society. So there were other societies in history where wealth was held in the form of cattle. right? And in all human societies ever, wealth ownership was distributed in an oligarchic manner. There were always, if you look at the um, the societies that did live based on cattle, many of these were migratory herding societies. You would find that there'd be sort of like one chief who owned like half or more of the cows, and their ownership claim was violence backed. If somebody tried to say, no, you already have too many cows, I'm taking one of these cows, that person would be unalived. But today, here now, wealth does not take the form of cattle. It takes the form of predominantly, like I said, about half of it is in the form of real estate. About half of it is in the form of stocks. Now, part of the key problem here for people to understand of why we need some kind of check on the accumulation of wealth into private hands is this. There's this thing called interest. Interest is a return on wealth. So if you have a person, let's say, inherit $100 million and the interest rate is 5%, then that person who has $100 million without blinking, without doing anything, annually will receive an income of $5 million. And if they spend just part of that, let's say they spend $1 million, so they're living very lavishly, they still have a passive income that is $4 million above and beyond the spending that they engaged in for that year. So they will carry that additional $4 million into the next year. So they inherited $100 million a year later. They spent $1 million, even though they weren't necessarily doing any work. They were sitting around picking their nose, strippers and cocaine, whatever. They didn't work, and a year later, they receive an additional $4 million. So they go from $100 million to $104 million. Now, one of the things that they're going to do with that additional $4 million is buy more income generating assets. So the next year, at the same 5% return, they're getting return on $104 million. And anybody who is the least bit familiar with exponential patterns can kind of see where this is going. If you compound this pattern over time, that person is going to agglomerate a massive pile of wealth, and that wealth will grow to encompass claims on more and more and more of everything that there is to own. This has a destabilizing effect on society because it means that control of everything, functionally speaking, is accumulating into the hands, it's concentrating in the hands of a few individuals. If you continue to play this game out year after year after year, that 100, I mean, let's do the math real quick. Please give me a chart over 50 years of how the private wealth of an individual may increase given an inheritance of 100 million in year one and an annual return on investment of 5%. I want you to take a look at how these numbers shape up. ChatGPT is having to think about it. See that? See that chart? All right. Here's a chart showing how 100 million grows over 50 years at a 5% annual return. By year 50, the original inheritance compounds to over $1.1 billion. So it has increased over the course of 50 years 11-fold. That's passive income at a massive scale. So 50 years down the line, and we live on a historical timeline. Bear this in mind. This is an evolving game. It is a system of a historical nature. Time exists, okay? And so there are already all these massive fortunes, and what this effectively means is, so let's say that this wealth accumulation path started 50 years ago and brings us to today, and you have what is called a billionaire. What is 5% of $1 billion? AKA, what is the return in the form of interest to a billionaire who has just $1 billion? Well, 5% of 1 billion is $50 million. So this person, again, picking their nose, spending money on cocaine and strippers, they can scale up their spending now to millions of dollars per year. And without doing anything, they will receive a return on investment at the end of a year of $50 million. So a person who has $1 billion in wealth invested will receive somewhere on the order of $50 million every year. It's very difficult to spend over $50 million. It can be done, but most of the things that you would buy, like real estate or stocks at that scale, are things that are going to continue this snowball effect. I don't know if it's starting to make sense for y'all, but part of what this means on the other side is that in order for that billionaire to receive $50 million in the form of interest at the end of the year, that $50 million has to come from somewhere. And that person who's receiving the $50 million, they didn't produce anything. They sat around, picked their nose, they went around on a yacht, they paid to have strippers sent out, whatever. The lifestyles of the rich and the famous are absurd in many ways. So that person didn't do anything, but they received over $50 million in the form of a return on investment. Where is it coming from? If that person didn't do anything and received $50 million, it means it had to come from somebody who was working. Is it starting to make sense now? Had to come from the labor share of income. And that is Piketty's first law of capitalism. Piketty's first law of capitalism, I'll write it for you really quickly here, is alpha equals R times beta. Alpha is the capital share of income. All right, so the pie, the total pie is 100%. Right? There's 100% of the pie every year to be distributed. Part of it is going to go to people in the form of a return on investment, and that is alpha. Okay, so what portion of the pie is going towards the super wealthy in the form of a return on investment? That is alpha. okay? And everything else, the rest of the pie, is 1 minus alpha. Or you could say 100% minus alpha. Because of the dynamic that I've just been explaining, alpha has a tendency to increase and increase and increase and increase and swallow up more and more, which means there's less and less to go towards everybody else. And there's debates to be had about whether it is, in fact, a zero-sum game, which I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole for now, but at the end of the day, there is a distributional question, and money has to come from somewhere. And so passive income at a massive scale, at the scale of 50 or $100 million annually, has to come from our paychecks. That's where it has to come from. The people who work, who produce things, are going to have to work harder and harder so that they are able to produce the wealth that then gets funneled up towards the oligarchs. And the oligarchs are going to continue buying and accumulating ownership of stocks, the companies that are performing the economic activity or coordinating the economic activity that makes the world go round. They're going to buy stocks of companies, and they're going to buy housing. Now, what happens when they buy housing? They buy a little bit more housing all the time. That's going to bid up the price of housing in such a way that you and I will not be able to afford to buy a home. Do you understand what's happening? Do you understand what we're saying here? What does it mean if you cannot afford to buy a home and you are renting, and the people that you are paying the rent to are increasingly a small set of mega owners? The rent that we pay to them is reinforcing this vicious circle because they can reinvest it in buying more housing, continuing to bid up the prices even further. And that's how we get to this hellscape right now where two incomes with no kids, a lot of people are having difficulties accessing housing, achieving ownership of a home. And that is what people are experiencing. And so they can't buy a home, they're forced to rent, and the rental properties are though the value of those rental properties is also being bid up. That means more and more power is agglomerating the hands of the uber wealthy to raise the rents. And what is a person at the end of the day who works all day simply to pay for the clothes on their back, the food on their plates, and the roof over their heads? A person who works all day just to earn life's basic necessities is fundamentally slave-like. And so where this game goes without some form of check on the infinite, ongoing, historical, continuous, dynamic accumulation of wealth, where this all goes is functional mass enslavement. And this is why everywhere you look in human history, you find masses of peasants working for the enrichment and the comfort of their betters. So there's a lot of people who are ideologically allergic to these realities. They don't want to know, they don't want to see. There's a Brazilian, Portuguese saying that my wife taught me. That people say, "I don't want to know." How does it go? No sé, no quiero saber. Um, I don't know. I don't want to know, and I hate anybody who does know. There are people who based on their previous ideological programming have a sort of allergy to discussing inequality, and that again is a function of the hyper concentrated ownership of media that we talked about. They've been programmed to think that discussing distributional politics, which is the only real politics, is destructive to the social fabric, when in fact not doing so is destructive to the social fabric and leads towards functional mass enslavement and debt peonage. So that is the case for some form of economic check and balance to prevent this ongoing snowball and spiral from concentrating arbitrarily the wealth into the hands of these massive fortunes. And it is not a pretty society when you look at, because history is already many thousands of years long. We've already seen this play out. And what is the end point? What is the logical conclusion to this type of system? It reaches a point where you have mass functional enslavement and oligarchy, and the ownership claims, the growing ownership claims of the people at the top allow them to control everything about the society, including what to do with the lives of all these unnecessary young men. Because the propagation of the race does not require a 1-to-1 male to female ratio. You can have one male inseminating 10 females. So that means biologically you have extra men. What do you do with them? What do you do with all these extra men that you don't actually need to propagate the race? You push them into a war machine. You send them off on misadventures of conquest. So economic inequality leads directly, logically, and inevitably towards a political inequality of an extreme extent, in which some people hold in their usufruct. In other words, they have a right to the product of the masses. The population works to serve those people, and those people at the top, the rentier, the hyper-capitalists, are able eventually to send these people, if their incentives should dictate that that would be good for them, into wars of conquest. The whole political entity becomes dysfunctional. These are not pretty societies to live in. They are slave societies. Now, is it the case that slavery has emerged over and over and again and been eliminated and re-emerged throughout history? Yes. Yes. Slavery is super common throughout human history. And by the time of the founding of the United States, the southern US slaveocracy, you had oligarchs like fucking George Washington in control of hundreds of these slaves. And the product of these slaves is owned by Washington. He has claims on everything that his hundreds of slaves produce, which allows him to buy more slaves. You see? You get it? So there is a natural tendency for wealth to accumulate in such a way that that places in the hands of a tiny minority of society control over life and limb and product of armies, masses of people who are working. There's not even a they don't even try to hide it. Working for them, for their betterment, for the betterment of the oligarchs. And so you get the first sort of chapter of the American experiment is this major conflict between the slaveocracy and the free states. The slaveocracy expands and expands and expands into new territories, and the free states say, okay, if we don't expand as well, then they're going to take over this entire political system. So that is the case, again, that is the case for some type of economic check. You have to prevent the returns on capital from creating a snowball that hyper concentrates control of everything. Otherwise, we all end up living as slaves without rights, or with fewer and fewer rights, working for the betterment of the few owners at the top of the political system. Like I said, a lot of people are going to be programmed to be allergic to just facing these basic realities. But you have to first create the consensus that, yeah, this dynamic exists. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Yeah, this dynamic exists. You have to first create that awareness before you can then have the discussion of what to do about it. And what to do about it is by no means simple. There are all kinds of difficulties attendant to the question of, okay, what do we do about it? How do we prevent this natural tendency in all economies and societies for wealth to hyperconcentrate and therefore political power to hyperconcentrate? Maybe that's a good stopping point. We'll talk more in the next video about what do you do? What do you do to counteract this natural tendency? This is economic gravity. Wealth hyperconcentrates. And it creates all sorts of problems for the people who are working to create that wealth. Call me a Marxist if you want, you fucking nimwit. Dimwit. Dipshit. Dipstick. I don't care what you call me. I'm just talking about how the world actually works. So we'll talk more about what to do about it in the next video. Like, share, subscribe.